Hi everyone and welcome to another video. This is a HP Compaq Elite 8200 which you could find in a lot of offices a few years ago. Got this off eBay and I've applied quite a few updates to it. It's actually similar formats and size to the 8000 series in the earlier video I got. So looking at the front panel, it's more or less the same. Get USB 2 ports, microphone, headphone, and that's headphone, and it's got DVD rewriter drive. Looking at the back, it's got similar sort of ports. That's the exhaust fan. It's got the expansion slots there, plenty of USB 2 ports, Ethernet port, mouse and keyboard. We're using the GPU that I've installed for the screen output, so these VGA screen outputs, output ports is redundant. The thing I like about these cases, they're built for an office, so they're quite sturdy. You can sit a monitor on top quite happily there, and they're just really easy to get into as well. All you need to do is just lift this panel there, pull back slightly, and comes off. Now this didn't actually come with any drives or CPU or graphics card, so what I've done is I've installed an i5-2400 CPU. I reapplied, obviously I had some thermal paste and gave all the fans a clean, which is quite easy, and I added 8 gig of RAM, 60 gig solid state drive, 500 gig mechanical drive, and an R7 251 gig low profile graphics card. Now I probably could have got a higher grade graphics card, but for this sort of build that CPU will probably bottleneck anyway, and the whole idea is to stick to a relatively small budget. So I've just installed that graphics card, so gave it a clean out because it's quite dusty. And also a good thing about this case, you see it's got a lot of green tabs with arrow directions that you need to pull. For example, the CD writer comes up by lifting that tab, mechanical drive goes underneath, and I put the solid state drive in a slot underneath the power supply. And even the power supply is easy to remove, just lift and pull out. And I gave the fan a clean because it's quite dusty. And installed Windows 10 64-bit. Now there's a Windows 7 sticker on the side, and I used that license key to activate Windows 10 without any problems at all. Okay, so let's get this back together, and we'll run a few graphical benchmarks and run a few games and just see what this machine can do. Right, so I've started up the machine, no problem at all using Windows. Now considering that graphics card has only got 1 gig of VRAM, it does very well, as you'll see in the gaming benchmarks. Now as it's AMD, they usually keep their drivers more up to date, so older cards usually over time overtake NVIDIA cards. Now NVIDIA drivers tend to be better earlier on, but as I said, AMD drivers get better with age. Right, so we'll run some gaming benchmarks in a minute. First of all, we'll look at the graphical benchmark results that I've got. So starting with Heaven, these are benchmark results if you're interested. Score 1289, maximum frames per second 83, minimum 21, an average of 51. And then going on to PC Mark 10, get an overall result of 3474. And then Valley, we're getting a score of 1620, minimum 20 frames per second, maximum 69, average 38. And then 3D Mark, we're getting, in Fire Strike, we're getting 2426. Right, so let's run some games. Now I did notice the games run okay full window, but for some reason Bandicam occasionally records them in a smaller window. But if you listen to my commentary, that's the correct frames per second, because sometimes a frames per second counter in the top left stays at 30, but what I'm dictating is correct. And obviously with Bandicam you're losing a bit of quality anyway. Right, so let's run some gaming benchmark. This is Doom from 2016. And I've had to reduce the quality settings right down to low, and also the resolution, so the recorded video will look a little bit smaller than usual. At the moment on this outdoor level and in what's called arcade mode, I'm getting close to 40 frames per second, which for on this machine that's pretty decent. Obviously those frame rates are going to go down the more action on screen, and I think multiplayer those frame rates might go down even more. I mean, sometimes getting 50 frames per second, which is excellent, and definitely a playable experience. It's even touching 60 as well. But I think on the later levels you're definitely going to see a frame drop. Now Doom is very well optimized anyway, so you are going to get a decent playing experience on even low level machines such as this one. Okay, that's Doom. Now this is the first Crisis game. Now I have noticed when I started recording this video, the frame rate dropped by about 4 or 5 frames per second, so you have to take this into account that Bandicam recording is actually taking up some of the resource. But if you can aim for above 30 frames per second, and this is on high settings, then I think you're doing okay. Now they've recently released a remastered version of Crisis, so you want to revisit it with even higher graphical settings, then I think that's worth checking out. So on high we're getting above 30 frames per second, but there's not a lot of action going on. Even though this game was released back in 2007, it still stands up today. There's been a couple more Crisis games which I haven't played, but it's always the first one that a lot of benchmarkers turn to. Okay, so that's Crisis. Now this is a game in the Bioshock series. It's actually the final one, called Bioshock Infinite, and I think there's a couple of more games before this. Now I've noticed when I started recording with Bandicam, that frame rate dips slightly by at least 5 frames per second, but we are getting over 40, which is more than enough. It's an open area and there's not much action going on, but I would expect once there's a lot of action, then that frame rate's going to dip slightly, and this is on the medium graphical quality settings. Now I did try and record this once before, and I noticed in the top left the Bandicam frames per second stuck on 30. So if it's stuck on 30 now, it's going to be a false reading, because it is actually dipping above, it is actually going above 40 frames per second, which is decent enough. Right, so that's Bioshock Infinite.